welcome to the Faculty Lounge, a place for discussing strategies that foster student success. Settle in, get comfy, and let's learn together. Welcome, everyone, to the Faculty Lounge podcast. I'm your host, Eric Taylor, instructional designer with the FCTL. I'm here today with my co-host and colleague, Dr. Leslie Eccles, associate professor with the School of Mental Health and Behavioral Science. Today, our guest, Dr. Jim Lang, author, public speaker, emeritus professor of English, and former director of the DeMoore Center for Teaching and Excellence at Assumption University, currently serving as visiting professor at the Caneb Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Notre Dame. Jim writes a monthly column on teaching and learning for the Chronicle of Higher Education, and his work has been appearing in there since 1999. Thanks for coming, Jim.
You bet. I'm glad to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, you hit the main points there in your introduction, which I appreciate. So I spent, I got my interest initially was in English literature, and so I got my degree in that. And but during the time that I was finishing my PhD, I took a position at the Searle Center for Teaching Excellence at Northwestern, and that was just sort of to earn money for graduate school. But then I got interested. And so my last year as a PhD student, I was working there. And then I was so interested that the director offered, Ken Bain, who is a well-known person in this field as well, he offered me a job to stay there. And so I did that for 3 years. And during that time, kind of my interest in teaching and learning kind of blossomed. At the same time, I enjoyed my 3 years there, but I kind of was interested in teaching for myself and so I went out on the job market for tenure track jobs in English literature. And I did got a job at Assumption College at that time, now Assumption University. And so I kind of went through my full career there, about 2 decades of that, and worked my way up through the ranks, and then at the same time, while teaching English classes and doing that kind of normal stuff that you would do as a English professor, I was kind of keeping my interest in teaching and learning stuff. Because the ongoing thing for me, whatever else I was doing in the classroom at the institution. And so in 2013, I founded our Center for Teaching Excellence. And so then I spent 8 years doing that and being still kind of teaching English. In 2021, I stepped away from full-time teaching. I had a lot of opportunities at that point for people who were asking me to come and give workshops and give lectures, and I always have been very drawn to writing. And so I wanted to give myself the opportunity to kind of write in a more committed way, and then support that work by, giving workshops and lectures. And I enjoyed my 2 years away from full-time, having like a full-time job. I had like a health thing that happened at that time as well. And so I was able to recover from that. But then this year, I was invited to sort of come back into the academic world more fully by the Caneb Center for Teaching Excellence at the University of Notre Dame. I gave a talk there in the spring, and the director approached me afterwards, and she knew I was an alum of Notre Dame and that I had fond feelings for the place, and wondered if I might be interested in coming back. And so that's what I'm doing now. Currently, I'm a visiting professor there at the Caneb Center. I spend a week on campus every month, and then the rest of the time I'm remote, and doing these kinds of same things I did at our teaching center, working with faculty, creating programming, supporting existing programming. So I'm really enjoying that.
Excellent. I heard you mention Ken Bain. We had Ken as a guest at our yearly showcase event that you were also at this year. So I think Leslie would like to kind of mention something about that.
Yes, I promised I would say all sorts of nice things about you. So I have the first nice thing I want to say is, we were fortunate enough to have you as our keynote speaker at our most recent showcase that was on August 16th this year. And so I just wanted to tell you personally, after the fact, I think I may have mentioned this on the drive back to the airport. I was lucky enough to be your chauffeur for that. But a couple of things that really stood out and made me excited for this podcast, just to hear from you again. You have this really great ability to make educators feel like, hey, I can do that. Like I can do that. It's not overwhelming. it's not scary. Like that's something I can do. And that's really great as someone who's still, teaching full time, to walk away from an event thinking like, oh, yeah, I can get better. I could do that. The other thing is, I don't get inspired really often. And when you gave your keynote presentation, there were moments where I felt inspired and I felt like, I want to do that. I want to be like Jim someday. Because you just, you're making people feel better and giving them tools that they really can use. So anyway, I'm thrilled to have a few more minutes with you, and I'm sure I will be inspired again.
Thank you. And of course, you mentioned that you were my chauffeur, but you didn't tell them that you took me out for custard also. Like that was a really important part of what you did when I was there.
Nice.
Andy's,
that
right?
was included in the chauffeuring. Yeah.
No, and I appreciate that. And there's kind of two things I would say about that. The first is I am a kind of a positive person, and I like to sort of my kids kind of get annoyed at me because I'm always saying, we can do it, you can do it, don't worry. But also I do believe that these strategies, I've worked with enough people now to see that kind of small teaching stuff, and they can work, and they can help people sort of find like a step forward wherever they are. Just trying these things can, and that step forward is often enough to kind of get you sort of back into where you want to be, and then start feel like you're making progress as a teacher. So yeah, thank you.
Very good. Very good. Well, I kind of want to move on. We'll get to a few of your books. I would feel remiss if I did not mention Distracted, which was published today, 3 years ago, on October 20th, 2020. So
happy anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, 3 years. Good. Talk a little bit about Distracted. Give us a short overview what the the theme of your book is.
I appreciate you saying that. I didn't even think about that this was the date. It was kind of a strange time for a book to come out because, of course, this was like, I don't know, 5 months into the pandemic. And it was a book that sort of came out, and it was really focused on sort of classroom teaching in some ways. And then we were all remote at that point. So, and it's kind of funny to see. I just sort of assumed, well, the book is just going to sort of, fade away into oblivion because of all those circumstances that were happening at that time. But it's kind of had like a second life. And we've gone back into the classroom, and people have become even more aware when we were all online, and then we had to come back into the classroom. We had to think again about these challenges that we face, about helping students be engaged and focus. And so, one of the things I've tried to do in my writing career for teaching and learning stuff has been to take like a problem-based focus. And so you can see that in two of my books, Distracted and also Cheating Lessons. And I think sometimes it can be a challenge to invite people in to do hard thinking about teaching and learning, especially for those of us who didn't get that kind of training, as most of us didn't. And it's easy to kind of fall back on traditions and do the things that can sort of just work on a everyday basis. And so I like to go sometimes to where people are having problems. And so those when you go to those places, people yeah, do you have an idea for this, or can you help me with this specific problem? And once you've drawn people into that, then you can say, hey, as long as we're here and we're talking about teaching, here's some other things you might think about going forward as a teacher. And these things might help you with your problem, but they also might help you in a more general way. And so both Cheating Lessons and Distracted are books which are sort of trying to say, here's a problem that you might have, but and I'm gonna give you some ideas for that. But I'm also kind of trying to sneak in some teaching and learning stuff along the way to encourage them to take a different approach or a different attitude towards these problems they're having in the classroom. And so for me, distraction is a great way to think about the challenge of distraction is an invitation for us to think about attention. And so what helps people pay attention in a classroom? Well, it turns out there's all this research which shows us it's very hard for humans to pay attention to cognitively challenging tasks for long periods of time. And that's been true since going back to the ancient Greeks and probably further than that. And so when we realize that, we see that the things that we're asking people to do in education are challenging things. And so we shouldn't just sort of take it for granted that people should just sit in a room for 75 minutes and focus real hard. I mean, that's a really challenging a challenging thing for anyone to do. And so the question then becomes, for the teacher, how can I help? That student has to sit there, not moving around, not in some cases, not being that active in terms of what they're actually doing. What would help that student? What would help them keep focused and really support their learning? And so this challenge that we initially think, well, this is the student's problem. They can't pay attention. But we can kind of reverse our thinking and say, okay, actually, any human being in that situation needs help paying attention. And so what could I do with my expertise as a teacher? What could I do to support attention? And that's what that book is really about.
I love the focus that you had on the history of attention in that book. That was one of my favorite parts about it. It was an excellent read.
Whenever I, take these challenges up, the first thing I like to do is write the histories, and that to me, that's the most enjoyable part of the book is the sort of backstories, the sort of interesting lead ups to these challenges that we face today. I know people want to get right to the techniques, but I force them to go through and listen to the history.
You're laying the bricks first. Awesome.
Yeah.
So I also really enjoyed your idea of the idea of banning distractions versus embracing the distractions. I'm much more of an embracer. I think a lot of folks are having that conversation around AI right now.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that. What do you mean by embracing these distractions? How do you embrace these distractions?
So there's, we have different kinds of attention, and we can pay attention in different ways. And so one of the kind of primary way that we've sort of lionized attention in higher education, or education more generally, is to sit quietly and focus real hard on a text or a person talking. And that kind of attention does good work for us. It's important. And everyone should have that. As much as we can, we should sort of cultivate that skill. But there's kind of other ways to think about the way that attention works. And some of those other ways can actually lead us to sort of creative thinking and to kind of other ways to process ideas or come up with different ways to solve problems. So, for example, in a classroom, I can force students to sort of listen to me for 50 minutes. And good for them if they can do that and they learn from it. That's great. But I can also make more of an experience that sort of has varied structure to it, in which, for example, I have sort of 3 different things that are planned, and maybe 20 minutes of that is lecturing, but there's another 10 minutes where the students are actually actively, writing or talking to each other, and then another 20 minutes where they're sort of in small groups trying to solve a problem, right? So I'm trying to move them. Actually, I saw a talk at Notre Dame when I was there early in October. A guy, his name was David Germano, and he is in the University of Virginia, and he writes about mindfulness. And this talk, one of the things he said really caught my own attention. He said, I had to think about myself in the classroom as a choreographer, and I'm choreographing a set of experiences. And I thought, that is a great way. I wish I had sort of thought of that when I was writing the book, because I would like to have used that idea.
Yeah. That's
so. Those experiences can be varied, and as I go through experience to experience, it might be like jogging new ideas for me, or like helping me see things in a different way than just I would see it in one way when I'm just sort of focused on the task for the entire time.
Awesome, great.
Eric, can I jump in?
You bet, Leslie.
One of the things that you talk about in Distracted is the role of technology, which for me, I have a son, and kind of when he was in middle school, I found myself frustrated with, how much time he was spending on his device, is what they called it. And everything was on the device. And it drove me crazy. And you talk about this a little bit in the book, and I think it's kind of along the same lines of banning versus embracing. So can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on, banning technology versus using technology, and how that fits in this discussion of attention?
Yeah, so I'm always like a middle ground person, and that's in almost everything in my life. I kind of occupy the middle ground. And that's the case here as well. But in this particular case, the phrase I like to use instead is it's context specific. So, right, our devices, they are challenging for our attention if we're trying to do something like that. It's kind of focused on learning, or that really even our like relationships, or when we're trying to pay attention to something that matters. Sometimes the devices can get in the way of that. But again, just like a varied experience in the classroom, the devices also, and whatever they might be, AI, whatever it might be, those also can be like spurs to creativity, and they can help us think about things in new ways and invite us to like solve problems in different ways. So again, it's not. I do think we shouldn't just say the devices are neutral. I'm not sure that's right either, because the devices are sort of engineered to sort of hijack our attention, and so they're not exactly neutral. But at the same time, if we're aware of how we're using them, we can use them in ways that are productive. And so for me, the classroom experience when it comes to technology is not to say they never belong in my classroom or they always belong in my classroom. As educators, we actually want to focus. We want to like help students learn to use their devices and still get their work done, but also sometimes to think about how do I stay away from my devices and actually really try to cultivate that sort of really sort of laser focus when you need it, essentially. And so for me in the classroom, it's context specific. So it depends on what we're doing. And so if I'm just, giving a lecture, a 20-minute mini lecture, okay, it's fine. People can use their devices or not, that's fine. But if I'm like in a literature class and we're going to talk about the meaning of a poem and I want them to relate it to their lives, get in a circle and no one needs their devices. We're just going to talk. And I hope it makes it more meaningful experience for us to look at each other and to sort of respect our individual presences in that room. But again, there's other times when the devices are absolutely necessary, because I want you to sort of quick do a little bit of research on this author that we're reading, and we've come up with something strange or unusual in the poem. It doesn't make any sense. So let's just get online and look it up. And instead of just sort of speculating about it, let's take a look. It's available. Yep. So, and I can only use my own discipline here, but I'm sure people can think about these things in their own disciplines. But that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Thank you for that. So small teaching. Now, small teaching came out, if I'm correct, that came out before Distracted. You published that
Yes.
in 2016, if I remember
Yes.
right. So small teaching is much more than just a book. It's actually a movement, from what I understand. So what is small teaching?
Small teaching has kind of two core principles to it. The first core principle is that we can make small changes to the ways that we design courses, engage in classroom practice, or communicate with students. And those small changes can make a significant difference to student learning and well-being. And so that's part one. But you don't want to just make changes to make changes for change's sake. Instead, we want to think about those changes coming from the research on how people learn. And so the book itself, each chapter is based on a learning principle, and then takes those principles and guides us into like a handful of strategies that you could use in the classroom. And the small part of that essentially means neither the teacher or the student is having to make some huge, significant investment of time or energy in engaging in these kinds of activities. And so the easiest way to illustrate this is the opening and closing minutes of class. And I always look at those moments to try to think about where these changes have would some kind of change to what would I normally do in the classroom. Those moments can be like great ripe opportunities for changes, and they can be easy. Like the easiest one that's most people know about, because I didn't invent it, the minute paper, right? So at the end of the class period, you stop and ask students to write down the most important thing they learned in class that day, and one question they have about the material. And so that's a small teaching activity that kind of gets folded into these kinds of changes. And so over the course of the book, there's probably 30 to 40 of those kinds of small strategies recommended, and each of them are tied to a learning principle. And so that's the kind of the big picture of the book.
Got it. So what led you to adopt this methodology? Was it your teaching experience, or how did you come up with this?
Yeah, so this is kind of coming from, again, like for me, I had a different, like the questions that I had for like cheating lessons and distracted were like, why are students cheating my class? And distraction, like, why are students distracted in class? So like, those were kind of like classroom based questions. Small teaching question was more like a faculty development question. And my question there was, okay, so we have all this research now about how people learn, even in 2016, not only 7 years ago. But we have all this research about how people learn. There's a lot of good resources about how we can put those ideas into practice, that research into practice in the classroom. And yet, when I looked around me, and directing our teaching center, I have a lot of opportunities to observe courses, but also the research showed me most people are not using that research. Like, why is that happening? There's some kind of strange gap here between what we know works and what people are actually doing. And so I kind of finally decided the thing that's getting in the way of people's making those changes is this sense that I have to flip my classroom, and that's the only thing I can do to change my teaching. And that's a huge, significant investment of my time, and I just don't know how to do it. And, I'm just going to keep teaching the way I'm teaching. Mm-hmm. And so for me, small teaching is the way to bridge that gap. Mm-hmm. And so, well, I think that the small changes on their own, they can be good. But again, I always have like a secret agenda here. If people have had like a few examples of like those small teaching wins, they'll be curious, I hope, then to go deeper and to learn more about research, what it tells us, and how they could maybe go further in terms of their own teaching progress as a teacher.
Great. How did you go about implementing that? Like in your own classroom? I assume you were still teaching when you kind of were doing
Yeah.
What did that implementation look like with your students? And how did your students react? Second part of this is, what kind of feedback did you get from your students?
Yeah, so I started using the changes as I was doing the research, or probably a few years beforehand, and then afterwards. So probably from 2010 on, essentially, I started to experiment with these ideas. Some of them came out from the research I had done on cheating lessons, which came out actually in 2013. And so that kind of the first like a body of research I really got interested in, and I could see there was like a short pathway here from the research. The classroom was about retrieval practice. And retrieval practice is, this simple idea that if you want to remember something, you have to practice retrieving it from your memory. There's like a huge body of research behind this. And we tend to think about the fact that, if I want to remember something, I have to find different ways to cram it into my head. But of course, we know now that the best way to remember something is actually to practice getting it out of your head. That's really the challenge of our memories. It's not cramming stuff in, it's getting stuff out when you need it and when you want it. So I could kind of start to experiment. And so I wrote about that a little bit in cheating lessons. And then that research was kind of interesting to me, because I was like, I wonder if there's other things that are like this that would lead to this kind of, again, have this sort of short road from the research to classroom practice. And so I started experimenting with different things. And so retrieval practice was one of the first ones that I started implementing. And I'd never used really quizzes in my own teaching. But I could see once I started using quizzes, not like in a punitive way, but just to sort of help people, get mastery of the course material. And I could see a difference there. And then I started experimenting with one of the principles I really like, which is about connections, helping students make connections between the material and the course and their lives outside of the course. And so one of my favorite strategies, which I still, is my favorite strategy in small teaching, is actually in the middle of the book, the fifth chapter, in the middle of the fifth chapter. So it's like the heart of the book. Is this very simple thing I started to do, which was to give my students blue books, like the blue exam books. And then I asked them to bring those blue books to class every day. And once a week, I asked them to take out your blue books, and you're going to write a 1-paragraph response to a connection question designed to help you see how this material is related to something in life. And so I'd say, for example, tell me how something that we talked about today connects to something you learned in another course. Or tell me how something we talked about today you've experienced in your life or in the life of somebody else you know. And so those would be like the last 10 minutes of class. So again, small teaching takes 10 minutes of class time. It was very low stakes. It
It's
Yeah,
awesome.
they counted just for completion,
Yeah.
right? And so and I could see, like, not only did I see like people thinking, actually, like you could kind of see the thinking when they were writing those things, and they would say, respond, and we'd have like a quick discussion about what they heard. I heard the most amazing things, and I could also see they would write things in their connection notebooks, and then used in their paper topics. I could see like they had sort of come up with this idea very quickly in class, and then realized that it was a good idea, and they wrote a paper about it, and then they wrote about it again in the final exam. Right?
That's
So I could
great.
see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was to me like a good example of these things can really work, and they don't take a lot of time. And so I started and that was the big one I really kind of kept.
I love that one. That one's like it's a practical application of what you just spent time discussing.
Yes.
The last few minutes, it forces them to kind of think about what they just heard. They understand it, but now can you apply that? Give me another example of it, and that's going to drill it in some heads. So I
yes,
like approach. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to hop in because at the end, when you were wrapping up your comments about distracted, Eric looked at me and I realized I'm so just soaking up everything you're saying that I'm not being a good co-host and asking you any questions. So I'm going to hop in this time. Not necessarily a question, but because of your book, so I've been implementing some of these things in my courses this semester. One that I'm doing in both of my classes is the little quiz at the end of class, and have told the students, this is, so I cite the research. So I want them to know why I'm doing it. Like, this is not to make you nervous, or, this is actually to help you with that retrieval practice. And typically there are multiple choice questions, and there's like two options. So, you got a 50-50 shot,
Yeah.
and sometimes I make the wrong answer pretty obviously wrong.
That's those low stakes.
Yeah.
But that's been great.
Yeah.
And it's a good opportunity to help them remember those like critical pieces of information. So I love it. Thanks for
and also, it's another thing too, like, again, just like thinking about the lived experience in the classroom, just something a little bit different at the end, right? Just step away from just that you're in listening mode. Now you have to stop and quick do something. And it's part of that choreography, right, is to have like a little finish at the end of the experience, right?
That becomes habit. That's all. That's
yeah.
Great. So at Notre Dame, how do your faculty, how do you encourage them to implement styles like this? Are there programs through your teaching and learning center, or do you have a lot of faculty that implement the small teaching ideas? Or
well, I just started, so eventually. But I think the reason they wanted me to come actually was because at the KNAP Center, they're very big fans of small teaching. And so one of the things we're trying to do now is to, I think actually it's going to go out this next week. They're sending something out to all the chairs, essentially, letting them know that I'm on campus, and this is the book that I've written. It's about, and I think they're making it available, and so I'll have the opportunity to kind of go around and sort of talk to more faculty. But I really just started on October 1st, so it's not quite. I'm still trying to figure exactly how this is going to play out in Notre Dame.
Got it. Okay. Well, I know the FCTL, we have several programs that we try to help our faculty or encourage our faculty to change their or adapt their teaching styles. So, Leslie, you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we were fortunate enough to be able to give a copy of Small Teaching to everyone who came to Showcase in the summer. But also, we're going to try to get the word out even more in the spring semester with one of our faculty learning communities. So last year we started a number of faculty learning communities on various topics. And so many faculty were inspired, like me, by your keynote presentation and then the workshop that followed, that we've decided to have a faculty learning community with your book as the focus. So that's going to happen in the spring of the 2024 semester. I'll be the facilitator for that. Maybe in your honor, I'll give out some Andy's gift cards. But for faculty who are interested, be on the lookout for the opportunity to register for that. It's going to be on Thursday afternoons in the spring. We'll meet about every other week or so. But I am excited to dive in and really study the chapters in depth and just help the faculty incorporate some of these strategies into their teaching.
That sounds so
That's
great.
great. And let me know when you're we're getting close to the end, and I'll zoom in for 15 minutes or something like that if you're available. If you guys are in.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, that is great. Thank you so much for talking about that, Leslie. We do have, that is one of many FLCs, faculty learning communities, that we have put together. So hop over to the FCTL website. We keep it up to date, and there's information on how to register and how to participate in any of our events there. I think we'll wrap it up. I want to give big thanks to Dr. Leslie Eccles. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Jim Lang for joining us today. It's been quite a treat. We've been looking forward to this for a while, so thank you very much.
Yes.
All right, you bet. Thank you.
All right, have a good one. Thanks for being part of the Faculty Lounge. Join us next time, and let's learn together.